Salam and welcome back, everybody, to our podcast, Unapologetic, the Third Narrative.
Our original and authentic initiative in light of the war in Israel and Gaza.
A platform where we will share our identities, views, and experience from the ground. We just had a very interesting conversation with everyone in this room.
I think sometimes, when an interesting topic comes up, our video editor always has interesting insights, and I can hear him smiling in the corner. And it was fascinating, honestly, to hear his views.
No, I once sat with a Palestinian editor, and I asked them about what they think about what they were filming, like if they ever said no to a gig or a job if their employer, whatever, like same thing what we talked about with our current editor. And he told me something very interesting. He told me, I am like a taxi driver. Whoever comes into my taxi and wants to be dropped off somewhere, I will drop him off. Whether he's Jewish, not Jewish, Muslim, Palestinian, Israeli, right-wing, left-wing, extremist, I'm here to do my job. I'm a taxi driver. And right now, I'm a camera taxi driver. So whoever wants to film something with my camera, as long as they're not killing no one, I will film it.
I have the same thing from my a few friends that I know that are working as video editors and content creators that have done it for the Arab political parties.
Yeah.
And I asked, because I know that their opinions are completely different, like very secular, and then you do to something very religious or something like that. I'm like, how do you, isn't that against what? They're like, no, this is work. It's like you say, like, I'm here, like, they're not harming anyone. It's not like, I don't agree with them, but it doesn't mean that I don't do the work for them. Like, why not? And I'll help them. So it was interesting to have, today's comments. And do you want to elaborate a little bit more on our conversation?
Yeah. So he basically asked us what we saw. I asked him, we had we're recording 2 episodes in a row, and I asked, where are you from? And he said, a specific place in Israel. And then I was like, do you care what we do with Jerusalem? Like, do you care if we split it in half? You have it, we have it. Like, do you care? And he gave the answer, and he's like, there's a part of me that's a realist and a part of me that's an idealist. And I would love to live here in harmony with peace with everyone, wherever I'm living. But I also see what's happening now and what has happened in history, and I don't want that to happen. And I think it can't happen unless some miracle blesses us here in this land. And that promoted kind of the conversation of it took us back to October 7th, and it took us back to what we want, basically us from the third narrative. And he asked us that question, and I guess my answer was 2 things. One is to make people understand that Israeli security comes with Palestinian liberation, and vice versa. Palestinian liberation will only come with Israeli security. Other than that, then you're promoting the mass destruction of one people. And the other thing was promoting trust between, I care about everyone on this land, but we're all selfish. I think about myself and I think about my family. We're all at this point, we have all Israeli citizenship, and I care about our rights here as Israeli citizens, as a minority group here. And it just took me back. I was like, imagine if we were on October 7th, and the first week of October 7th, and the way that the Israeli state reacted was, we will protect every single Israeli, even the Palestinian Israelis. Hamas murdered the Palestinian percentage of Israeli society. They touched our people. Imagine if that was like that.
The rhetoric.
Imagine if it's we will protect even the Palestinian citizens, because we know that Hamas is a terror organization, and they will kill every single person in sight, even the Palestinians, and they're a threat to our Palestinians. Because
I think they did that only to the world, right?
No,
they didn't do that to us.
No, Arab. They focused on the Bedouin community that they don't even protect. They don't even have shelters in the Bedouin community down south. And they said, like, look, it was even Arabs, but right now it has been made as a Jewish issue, not even an Israeli issue,
Yeah.
a Jewish issue. The biggest catastrophe that the
Jewish
Jews
people have
have
suffered.
seen in one day. In the beginning of the war, I felt a part of that. I felt a part that I was personally attacked. I was personally in danger. My safety was like, I wasn't secure, and I think maybe for the first time, I felt very Israeli. So that's what we were talking. It's like we want the acceptance. Like imagine that 20% was was adopted by the Israeli society and Israeli government, and how it would have how the because we saw how many doctors, Palestinian doctors, citizens of Israel, and even West Bankers have reacted to the to October 7th. They all went to their duty. Even some medics even died on duty, protecting whoever needed to be protected. So it was just a fascinating conversation that I wanted to also bring on camera and to record as well. Did I miss anything from what we said? I think I
I
missed
would,
something.
I mean, I would say only like my like personal frustration from that was, like you said, like the doctors and like in Israel, there was a bit of conversation about it in the first week of how, everybody's uniting
Mm-hmm.
and the doctors are there and the Arab doctors are with us. But then, like you said, after that, it vanished.
Yeah.
And then it became a soul, like the rhetoric was a very Jewish rhetoric, is that the resilience of the Jewish people, not
Mm-hmm.
even the Israeli people. Like if you're trying to include us even within the, you're not recognizing Palestinian identity and you're looking at us as Arab Israelis, you're not even including us in the conversation
Yeah.
because you're talking about Jewish resilience rather than Israeli
Yeah.
resilience. So even if somebody identifies as a very much Israeli and is an Arab, he's not part of that
Yeah.
equation. And that pushes, more and more people away
Yeah, we
from.
have some friends that used to say that they are Arab Israeli, and they have like kind of don't resonate at all with their Palestinianness at all. After October 7th, they are more and more Palestinian. They feel it. They don't feel Israeli at all. And I think, not that I think one identity should be marginalized or not, but I think it's an opportunity missed.
Yes.
That could have resulted in from that very very dark time. That unity was let go, and now the Palestinian community is as isolated as ever, from my experience, from what it could and what it was. And it could be something very greater and very bigger, whether it's midst a war or even after a war.
And I think the beautiful thing about our conversation with our editor was also how it ended with, we talked about the importance of the mutual recognition. How do we do that? Education.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, after, his feelings about the situation, our feelings about the situation, we all agree at the end of the day that what can change the reality is education. And through education, you develop leaderships that is willing, and not only willing, but is aware that you need leaders who are willing to sacrifice themselves. I think that's a very important thing that needs to change, because leaders right now are, well, I don't generally personally call them leaders, because a leader needs to be aware of, you need to have personal sacrifice for the greater good. And I don't see anyone in the political spectrum at the moment who's doing that to that extent, knowing that, it will harm you politically, but you're doing it for the better interest of your people, regardless if it's popular or not.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have those leaders
No,
at
we
the
don't.
moment.
We don't. But this is a very interesting topic. However, it is not the topic of our current episode.
Yeah.
This episode, we are going to talk about protests. I think it's a very long and overdue topic that we agreed to talk about. And
A
we
lot
will
of audience
share,
asked
yes,
for
and we'll
it.
share why we haven't talked or touched upon it and why we're going to do it in this specific manner soon. But yeah, today we're going to delve into Israeli protests, Palestinian protests, and international protests, which include the student encampments, correct?
Correct.
The topic of the protests has been a very, very I don't even like saying the popular topic, but it
In
has
demand.
an in-demand topic, and it has also been, and we'll talk about it in a bit. It has been a hot topic on social media and traditional media as well. So it's not just that people are interested in it, but it is also like it's playing, like it's a player in the play field. So it was requested a lot. The reason why we haven't touched upon it yet is, one, we are trying the best that we can to not turn into or be pressured into becoming kind of a news agency, because it's not what we want to do. We're not a news agency. We know that there are multiple ways where you can know what's going on. We're not avoiding the encampments. We're not avoiding the protests. The exact opposite. Right now, we want to try and touch upon each and every one of them and what we think what is happening, and maybe we can talk about how we can improve, because if something exists, it's not just an option of them existing and not existing. Maybe a morph, so like trying to change things into something different. And we're going to touch upon a lot of things because we have our fair share of protests here as well.
Yeah, which I think, which is part of our frustration, right? Is that, okay, yeah, we understand, our international audience wants us to talk about, the protests in the West and the encampments, but it's also a reminder that, we're dealing with the actual conflict here. And part of our frustration has been that the topic of the protests in the West and the topic of the encampments have become sort of the main topics for them, rather than having the actual things that are happening here as the main topics. So it really became, and you said it to me before, it's an American issue. It's not,
No, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it one step of it at a time. But yeah, I think, but also it is happening to them, like the international community.
yes.
They're going to talk about the protests because it's at their doorstep. It's not at ours. Maybe we're not going to revert to them because it's honestly not even on the top 10 of my priority list right now. I don't think it's yours either, because we are seeing what's happening on the ground. We are hearing, looking, watching, and for me, there's more pressing matters at hand. And even though there is the question of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism with these protests and hate speech and all of that, which is why we decided to address it in the way that we're addressing it today.
And also we need to digest it,
Yeah.
not to see one or two protests and immediately come out with something and just like, okay, we support this or we're against that. Like, we need to understand what's happening, what's developing, what's unfolding, from experiences that we hear about from friends, from others. And now we can talk about it.
So let's start, before we dive into the micro, let's go to the macro a little bit. Let's go to the international community and their protests. So I had mixed feelings. I think in the beginning when I saw the student encampments in specific, I didn't know what to think. But however, I didn't feel like they were being covered on in a very biased way, whether it's the pro-Palestinians saying, "Oh, it's completely peaceful. We don't let anyone not walk here. We're not anti-Semites at all. We're not anti-Jewish. We're nothing. We're just like demonstrating peacefully." And then there was on the other side where it was being portrayed as extremely violent, extremely anti-Semitic, extremely unacceptable. And I saw the footage, and it is 100% unacceptable what I saw. But I don't believe that's the entire picture. I don't think it was the entire picture. I do believe that there were peaceful demonstrations and peaceful sit outs and protests outside of the in the student encampments. I'll tell you my conclusion now, but I want to hear what you thought about them initially.
So, I mean, I wanted to actually first talk about generally the protests that are happening in the West,
okay.
But the pro-Palestinians on one side, the pro-Israelis on the other side. I mean, we talked about it before, how frustrating it is that we would hope that the international community would have a different route rather than polarized protests, but joint protest, or a general call for the end of this conflict altogether. And this is something that we're talking about, and one of the things why we started this podcast in the beginning. how important the role of the West is, and how we hope that the role of the West will be towards changing the reality rather than bickering on. And we talked about it before, like for instance, they just sit and talk about only the terminology, and that's where the conversation is on term, and trying to prove or disprove a term just so I can feel that I'm morally supporting the right side versus the wrong side. And one protest, I only saw one protest in the international spectrum when I was in London.
When you were in London. Okay.
That was the only one that I personally saw. So I can't obviously talk about all the protests. I can talk about this one. So one of the things that struck to me the most was two things. One, that was very interesting how there was one, and I think I told you the story of one Jewish guy.
Yeah.
Who was I saw this one massive poster, right, of Hamdallah, which is the Palestinian caricature of the refugees.
What? It's not the Palestinian character of the refugees.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it is. Hamdallah is the symbol from of the refugees that have left of the Palestinian refugees. That's why his face doesn't show.
Hamdallah is a boy being stopped by police. Like, I see it from an East Jerusalem perspective. That's how we see it.
No, but Hamdallah, the origin of the creation of Hamdallah, the reason why his face is not showing, the reason why this.
No, I know.
It's a refugee boy. The Najil Ali, the artist who created Hamdallah, it was a representation of that boy who's not here, and his face is not showing. And
he'll turn his face.
There are different. They will turn his face once he comes back.
Yeah,
and he's the symbol of the refugees. And I saw him with a massive writing above it saying, "Bring them home now." So I was like, wait a second.
I'm confused.
Yes, bring who? And it was the Bring Home Now slogan. But then on the side, it was writing the number of Palestinian refugees existing in the world since 1948.
Okay.
So it was using the Israeli slogan of Bring Them Home Now, talk about Palestinian refugees. And then I took a picture of it because I was like, whoa, this is crazy. And then this guy comes to me and was like, oh, this is my work. And it was an Israeli guy. Like, he's from Ra'anana. Like,
wow.
Like, not just Jewish, he's from Israel. And then I talked to him, and I remember him, like, we're talking, I'm like, yeah, we need to end the conflict. And he's like, we already disagree. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like,
because of the word conflict?
He's like, there is no conflict. There's only occupation. And as soon as an occupation is over, that's it. And honestly, like, I was just trying to digest his messages and just thinking, okay, let's say we end like, there's no occupation. All the Israeli military in the West Bank leaves the West Bank. No military presence there at all. You have two people, one land, both want it. That's a conflict. The occupation is the result of the conflict, but you cannot ignore that a conflict does exist. So that was my first, thing that I kind of like saw the difference in how we're perceiving things. And the other one was that he saw that the Zionist movement is the biggest issue, and that in order to change the state, we need to change all Zionists. And I'm like looking at it, and I'm like,
change or remove?
That all, like, he wants to I don't know if the word program or reshift the ideas of Israelis to become non-Zionists.
Yeah, I need to leave?
No, to just have a different perspective on how, like, that they're Jews, not Zionists, and that that all the Jewish people in Israel, who 99% of them are Zionists, for Christ's sake, and he wants to have all of them to change to become non-Zionists. That's his way to change things. So I'm like,
okay,
there's only one Ofer Kasif in this country who is like one Israeli politician who is like declared non-Zionist and is an Arab party, but the vast majority,
yes.
And the vast majority of Israelis are Zionists. I can't change them. I can't erase their, ideology. We can talk about a different terminology, like we talked before about how to define Zionism and how I can work with them on different levels in order to change our reality together. But I can't change their essence, just like they can't and shouldn't change my Palestinian identity. So it was very frustrating to hear, that this is a rhetoric that's also used by people who are on the pro-Palestinian side that are even Jewish. And the guy is Israeli. Like, he should know this reality
Yeah,
that
but
we
he's
have.
awakened.
And he's super popular in the UK because of it, honestly. You're like the king of London if you're Jewish and you're pro-Palestinian. And the second thing that was really frustrating to me was the end of the protest. Because I left the area of the protest, went to somewhere else. And then I saw them. I intersected again with the protest next to the Big Ben.
Mm-hmm.
And there I was extremely frustrated. One, there was a lot of people who were selling a lot of food that has nothing to do with Palestinian food and marketing as Palestinian food. And it felt commercialized in a way. That frustrated me.
Okay.
That I didn't, they're like, oh, we're giving the money to Gaza. I'm like, where? Like, who? And they didn't have answer. People didn't answer like where actually it's going to. And then at the end of the protest, people, and I've heard that there are different protests. This is the much more of the Gen Z wokey community, and the older generation has completely different protests. But from this one, the one that I saw, people were dancing dabke at the end of the protest. Like, that's your highlight of the protest? Dancing dabke in front of the Big Ben? That's the victory of the Palestinian people? Like, people are dying in Gaza and you're dancing? Like, how? There was a mismatch. And
What do you want them to do?
Mourn, not party. No, Debke is a happy song. It's a happy dance. It's not a sad dance. It's a dance of celebration. What are you celebrating exactly? For me, it felt disconnected from what's actually happening on the ground.
That we agree on. I think it is completely disconnected.
That particular thing was very just. It stabbed me in the heart a bit. Like, it's a celebration, and you're not supposed to be celebrating. And that party, like having a dabke in front of Big Ben, is not going to change the reality of the Gazans. And I wish the energy goes to something different. And we'll talk about what can be done. That was my personal experience from the one protest I saw, and the general protest, right? Before we talk about encampments and everything.
I don't know what I think about the point about the debke. I don't know if I'm like indifferent. I'm not pro, against. I don't know. Like, it is a part of Palestinian heritage. They can't actually do anything. Like, I know we can fundraise, we can donate humanitarian aid, host people. I understand that. But at the end of the day, they could have done that and also danced the dabke. Like, it's not one or the other. And some people, like you see some people from the Nova Festival, their slogan is "We will dance again," and they dance for the people that they have that have died, and that's the way that they mourn. I just feel like everyone has their own way. Now, the commercialized part about the food, when it's not actually Palestinian food and it's not actually going to humanitarian aid in Gaza, shame on you.
Like, it did not look anything like Palestinian food. And I try to understand, like, through which organization. They're like, oh, it's going to Gaza. I'm like where? Like, through who? Like, I wanna know. Like, like, it's that was frustrating, to be honest. And on what can be done, let's talk about it. Like, there are things that people can do to help Gazans. And they're not doing them in terms of demands, right? If you're talking about the UK, for instance, and where a lot of people are very pro-Palestinian and we have these massive protests, the UK is not, we have Gazans who are in Gaza, but we have Gazans who are not in Gaza. We have Gazans who are in Cairo stuck, poor without any money. Egypt is a very poor country who's not supporting them, and it's not letting them stay. Like, they have expiration dates on their time there in Egypt, and after that, they have nowhere to go. We know people and our friends who have been trying to submit to go to different countries in Europe and in the US. They're struggling to be given entry. There are people who are looking literally to anywhere that will give them residency for now. So if you're from, for instance, from where I was in the UK, demand your country, demand from your government to open the doors to Palestinians. They have physical injuries that need to be treated. They have mental things that need to be treated. And you're only talking about what needs to be done in Gaza, and you're forgetting the Gazans, the actual people, and what you can do physically to contribute to help actual people on the ground. Okay, you want to talk about all the big things? Sure, but at least do that as well. But they're not even doing that. That's my biggest frustration, is that everything is super macro and super idealist, and you know, from the river to the sea slogans and all of these things. And how is that? How's chanting helping the Gazans? It's creating awareness of the situation is important. We're seeing the influence of it. That's all important. But to direct it only to that without actual
No, listen, but
call of action
exactly.
things, that's what's missing from all these protests. Like, that's the
Protesting,
main thing that's missing from me from all the protests, is that a real call, actual physical call to action that they can do and see results that will help the people.
no, 100%. Protesting, like, I think is a protesting and demonstrating is a right. It's a democratic right, I think, correct? Like the right to protest. And they should do it, and they should chant, and they should, obviously non-hateful chants, but they should do it. But what, like you said, there should be a call to action, even with the encampments, even with any kind of protests across the world about any certain cause. Understand what your government is doing and understand what your government can be doing.
Exactly.
And those should be your demands. Your country calling for a ceasefire ain't going to do anything. Like, it's not going to do anything. So it's calling on like specific people in government to just say ceasefire. That's not going to do anything. You need actual specific things, like, say, donate a specific number to an X cause in the world. Do like even with like the BDS and the cancel culture and whatever. Okay, you want your university to stop having ties with Israel. Be specific. About what are they? Is it like something that has to do with the army? Is it something that has to do with military aid that the university is doing? Like, be specific. Understand what you're boycotting. Understand why you're protesting and what you want your country or institution to do. And that's why you're there. And you won't be removed until what you want is met. Your needs are met. But just to be there and to protest and to show that you are suffering and to ask for funding and to ask for things just to be there, it's ridiculous. And then put on top of that the anti-Semitism, and then put on top of that the anti-whatever. Like, I'm talking about any kind of things, and then we saw the counter ones by Israelis and Jewish people, which was also not very friendly. So I think it misses the mark. And when the encampments were the hot topic on social media, I didn't see anything about Gaza.
Exactly. It became the topic.
It became the topic. No one cares right now about the about Gaza because of the encampments, because that is the number one priority for the West, because that's, again, what's happening in their front yard. And then they forgot the most, like, the important issue at hand of why there are encampments, why there are protests. There's another thing that I wanted to say. You touched upon it being an American issue. Not just America, but like it is like, depends on the location. But let's say in the American case, it is an American issue in regards to it's Americans that are doing it, and it's affecting American day-to-day lives, whether it's American Arabs, immigrants, or American Jews. So everything that is happening, like, I remember that this sentence came out of my mouth when a Jewish a Jewish Israeli told me, it's like, you should also focus on going there and talking to the people in the encampments and educating them. And it's like, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to go educate people that are gonna are protesting and they're gonna go sleep on their comfy bed. That is the least of my concerns at the moment. They have books. They're in a prestigious university, for God's sake. They can educate themselves. But it is an American issue, and depending on the institutions, like these colleges, these campuses, it's their responsibility to understand how they deal with this kind of, because it is democracy. They're practicing their freedom of speech, and that is America. It's for the free, the land of the free. So they can say whatever they want. So they need to know how to maneuver that, how to manage that, use that. A lot of people are in one specific space. Either show them what a joint encampment is, so have a joint encampment, like the facility creates an alternative one to show them that it's not that we want to remove everyone who's protesting. No, we want to show you how you can use democracy and actually achieve something. And then for the institution to ask them what they want, like to actually understand what are they working with, and to use it as a space to educate. Like, a lot of people are ready. They can bring, like, we shared previously, Columbia University, their two amazing professors, one an Israeli Zionist and another a nationalist Palestinian American, who is, I think, I don't know if he's first generation or second generation, but his entire family is here. And he's very anti-Zionist, and he teaches history class with that other Israeli Zionist professor. So you have people on your campus that can embody these
Uplift those
yeah,
voices.
exactly. Use them, utilize them. Why aren't, like, they, like, I blame the students a lot, but the institution has a big responsibility on their hands to do something.
I mean, my biggest frustration, and this, I actually had a conversation yesterday with one of my best friends who's in a university in, I don't know if I should mention details, because also, like, it's very personal, what's happening to her.
No, don't.
And how she is very much targeted by the students around her.
She's Jewish?
She's Jewish, and in her network, she had people who would go around other students and tell them, don't be friends with her. She's Jewish. She's part of the genocide. Even though that my friend is, like, very much on the Israeli far left, very liberal.
It's like we're in second grade.
And that was my frustration. We're talking about an Ivy League school. That's my biggest frustration with what's happening on campuses. And she also told me, like, maybe I would want to be in like, I'm against the war, but I can't be in their protests against the war, because they're not just against the war. And one time she went to see what's happening, and people asked her to sign a document. Otherwise, she cannot be in the encampment.
In what she believes in, yeah.
In what she believes in, and everything that's only they believe in. And you have to abide by all these things.
So it's absolutely exclusive.
And you're putting your name under this in order to be part of the encampment. So it's not like they're opening it up to people with different views, even for other people who are against the war. No, you're Jewish. Like, this cannot work like that. And my biggest frustration is, how the hell you're talking about some of the Ivy League schools in the US, in the UK, in Canada, and they're having the same arguments as people are having it on the street. That, for me, is the biggest problem. Is, you want to practice your democracy, sababa, but the way that you're doing it is no better than any protest I see on the street. And you're supposed to be the next generation of leaders. You're supposed to be in Ivy League schools. I wasn't in an Ivy League school. I'm not in your level, and I'm able to have a better, more
conversation,
more nuanced conversation with people who are completely on the other spectrum of the aisle from me. And it's a lot of personal work. How are we able to do it? And you're not. You're an Ivy League school student. Your level is not that high, apparently. Like, seriously, like, I have much less. I used to, like, think of the Ivy League students as, like, these really, like, top notch, like, way over our heads. Honestly, they fell, like, they fell way short of what I used to think of them, and now I think of them as these regular people who are no better than anyone else, and who actually even do worse, because they are more privileged and they have more ability to do more, and they don't.
I wouldn't call all of them privileged, but let's say, what do you mean by...
They are in Ivy League schools. They have the privilege of getting the education of an Ivy League school.
Okay, but some of them worked very hard for it.
No. I'm not talking about economic privilege. I'm talking about educational
facilities,
privilege.
You mean?
You have the facility. You have the professors. You have the place that has history of education of some of the top of the world. And you're doing a street argument. Like, are you kidding me? Like, what is this? So no, it's really fell short from my expectations of what the Ivy League is all about. So now I'm like, if somebody tells me whatever university, I'm looking at all of them the same. Like, if you tell me you're from an Ivy League school, it doesn't impress me anymore. Okay, sababa, you're from just another university. What you're learning there is not that different from anyone else, and your level of education and ability to have this conversation is not better than anyone else that I've met. Like, it's actually sometimes worse. So what's Ivy League about it? Just the prestige? Sababa, go for it.
Let's not turn this episode into shitting on Ivy League schools, because that's not what we're doing.
It just ticks me off.
There's actually one thing that, not one thing, but one of the things that have happened, I think, the past 2 weeks. I don't know when we're going to release this. But did you see the Nova memory?
The memorial for the
Yes.
it was in New York, right?
In New York. Did you see the protests for
Yes.
that for that? I have something that a friend of mine sent me from his Telegram group a group that kind of like is related to that protest, and it says that there's a few infographics, and it says why we protested Nova, and under it is confronting Zionist propaganda and the manufacturing of consent for genocide. So, and it says, take action, confront and condemn the Nova propaganda exhibit. And obviously there's much, 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 much more. It's nasty stuff, claiming that it's coming out of Gaza. So it's like coming out from a Palestinian, that a Palestinian is writing it. Don't know how true that is. But like, this is like crazy shit. Like, and what was like the slogans, the flags that were used there, the Houthi flag, the Hamas flag, like not even the Palestinian flag. Like, it's insane. Absolutely insane. And let's say, hypothetically, we are in a world where the 7th of October was propaganda. It didn't happen. It's a myth, or the other stupid argument, which is that Israel did it. Israel killed its own people.
Go for it.
What is this gonna do? Like, what are these protests doing? You chanting for the death of some people. What is this going to achieve? How is this helping any Gazan or Palestinian? I don't understand. We interrupt this episode to express our heartfelt gratitude to our supporters and our Patreon members. Without you, we wouldn't be where we are today. So this is a reminder that if you join our Patreon community, you will have access to exclusive content, and you will be the first to know when we have something going on in your city. So that is your reminder to join the Patreon, and you can do it with the link in our description. Thank you so much for your support. We appreciate it a lot.
I have no answers, honestly. I don't know why, it's like, oh, we're combating the Zionist propaganda machine, blah, 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 that is spreading in the West, but
wouldn't ignoring the Zionist propaganda machine be more efficient than actually
because it puts you as radicals.
Yeah, promoting hate.
It's promoting our people as radical. Like
having the Houthi flag and the Hamas flag and having those slogans of like, and even forget it's so direct, the slogans. Like, the slogans are about like Jewish people and about Zionists. Like, it's absolutely crazy and insane. It's mind-boggling to me.
It became so polarized at this point that the hate is so high that people don't care anymore. People are willing to be their most radical self, and I think they just can get away with it, and there's no consequence. Like, they don't, like, sometimes people don't understand the consequence that it's affecting our people. How that's portraying our people as radical. You're not helping us, because if, our whole thing is trying to change this reality, and we need to change perception of Israelis and Palestinians, well, you're making the perception of Palestinians worse by this. Mm-hmm. You're making us look as the ones who want to promote radicalism and terror groups. I'm sorry. And honestly, some of the interviews I would hear sometimes, it's like unbelievable. Like, people who are like very supportive of the Houthis, and the Houthis are responsible for some of the the world's biggest famines right now. No one talks about it. Mm-hmm. And it's Americans who are talking about Palestinian famine, and are promoting another group that is responsible for another people's famine. Like, how? And I don't want, this is like my biggest issue, is like, I don't want anyone, for my people's case, condemn other people. You know what I mean? It's like,
no, don't get what you mean.
Meaning, if that helps Palestinian people, yeah, I'll side with everyone, even if they ruin other people's lives.
Uh-huh.
You know, if the Houthis are with the Palestinians, yeah, I'll support them. Oh, they kill their own people. Oh, I don't care about that. They like my people, so that's what's important. Like, that cannot be our allies. Not everyone who's saying they're supporting of the Palestinian people, even if they really are, and I don't think they really are, because I think a lot of people are using and leveraging the Palestinian case in order to grant themselves popularity. A lot of terror groups do so. Hezbollah does it all the time. The Islamic Republic does it all the time. They use the Palestinian flag in order to promote support and love for them, because they're supporting of the Palestinian people. And that's connection. We saw it in just, we talked with Elika on her in the episode, how people who protested against the Islamic Republic a few years ago because of what they do to women, and on the case of Mahsa Amini, 5 years later, they forget that this happened. And because the Islamic Republic is against Israel and pro-Palestinian, then we love it now.
Yeah.
Like, how can you not do the separation? That's not the allies I want.
It's blind support, because they don't understand what Palestine is. They don't understand what Palestinian is. And they don't know what it's like to live under Hamas or to live under the Houthis, because they live in America. They don't know. They're just being told what to support, how to support them. And I think they think that they're helping. I do think that it's genuine. And I think there are a lot of haters and a lot of people that want to spew hate that jump on this roller coaster in order to like take it as a chance to like either hate on Jews or to hate on Arabs, depending on where. But I do think that they want to help. They just are misdirected, completely misdirected. And I don't know how we got it's a big campaign. This thing of promoting the Houthis, promoting Iran, the Islamic Republic. It infiltrated America.
And it's because of their users of the Palestinian flag. That's how, someone who's killing his own people, other Arabs, other Muslims, can still be supported by other Arabs and other Muslims because they're raising a Palestinian flag. And I don't want anyone who's killing people to be my ally. And unfortunately, people are, maybe it's also out of desperation, but I think we can have better partners out there in the world than this.
So I guess basically our conclusion is that these entire things are being either organized by people that don't know what they're doing, and even the protests that are being a lot of people are investing so much work, effort, and money into them, and are just being hijacked by people who either don't believe in actual dialogue, don't believe in actual getting something out of these protests, and just want to be rah loud. And because there was a certain, I remember seeing something on social media where it was the first, I don't remember which university to give it credit, but the first actual encampment that got to a resolution with its university to divest in the demands that they had, whether it's ties with Israel or Israeli products or Israeli universities or whatever. So there is it's not to disqualify all protests and all encampments.
Some are very organized about their demands, very clear. My biggest issue with boycott in general, and here we probably, we disagree, is that because we live in a polarized world right now, when you boycott one thing, it doesn't stay there. If the student starts with, oh, let's boycott I don't know, students that are coming from settlement communities or products coming from the settlements, then it's Israeli universities, then it's Israeli students, and then it's Jewish students.
Mm-hmm.
That's my biggest issue. It does not stay within the realms of the demands. It always expands. It's just let's boycott certain products from the settlements or from Israel, and then it becomes, let's boycott Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes Jewish stores and properties and businesses in their countries because they're Jewish, not about Israeli. And that's my biggest issue, is that it expands beyond that to a a bigger, wider spectrum that misses the mark, and then it becomes racism.
I don't think that that is a reason to disqualify boycotting as a legit
It's not working
and that's because they're misusing it, but doesn't mean that
because the
boycotting
world is polarized, in my
it
opinion.
doesn't mean that boycotting shouldn't be used. Like, I think that, what would you rather them do? Would you rather them protest violently or peacefully?
No, but I don't think that, like, again, it creates violence because you're boycotting against Israeli things and then you're boycotting Jewish students, and that becomes violent. You're preventing,
Well,
my friend.
if you have Jewish students that align with, like, Jewish students that are pro the war or that are on the like Israeli
But they don't
side.
ask, right? Like,
I agree. I agree with
ask.
you.
Like,
I
my
agree
friend
with
wasn't
you.
allowed to go into university on her final exam. They blocked her from entering. Why? Because she's Jewish. It's not about her being Israeli
The
or not.
students themselves?
Yes, other
It's
students
fucked up.
blocked her from going to her exam because she's Jewish. Even though if you ask her, she's not pro-war. But you think they care? You think they're creating nuance? No, they're not. They're not asking her. They're not checking. And even the ones who know her and know her views still, no, she's Jewish. We're going to target her.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually went around to her friends telling them, oh, do you support genocide? How are you friends with this girl? Even though she has not, like, how is she the reason for the genocide? And they literally made a whole social campaign against her within other students because of where she's from, without any address to her ideas and her views and her complex views about the situation. So that's where my biggest issue
No,
lies.
I understand. I understand where you're coming from. I agree with you. I agree with everything that you're saying. But again, we can't take away that means of protest, that means that boycott, that way of resistance.
As a tool, it's
because
a tool.
You can't take it
but it's
away.
not working.
I understand that it works really well. You just have to use it correctly. And it needs unity, and it needs a unified message. It's just being either hijacked or misused. But with everything else that you said, I agree. I think it's about time that we I think it's about time that we switch to the different, like, let's go from the macro to the micro a little bit closer to home about Israeli protests, because yes, we're seeing these grand protests around the world, but what people might not know internationally is that here inside of Israel, there's also have been extreme big protests. The most recent one, the most biggest recent one is gathered amongst 175,000 people in the streets. And even this morning, you updated me that they closed the main highway in the center of Israel.
Yes, it was the women's protest along with the families of the hostages, calling for a deal now and an end for the war. And unfortunately, like we said before, the focus has been so strong on what's happening within the international media, so strong on what's happening there in terms of protests, that people sometimes are not even aware that these Israelis exist. Again, talking about how, Israelis not all in one box, just like my friend who's been thrown into this one box. Not all Israelis are pro-war. Not all Israelis are, pro violence as is being portrayed. And some of them are fighting for peace. We know this from the protests that we're seeing. We know one specific example from there was the Flag Day. That's, that has the other side kind of march, which is in Jerusalem by majority settler community that was very violent, attacking East Jerusalemite vendors in their shops on the streets of East Jerusalem, because they, for their side, celebrating, quote unquote, the unification of the Jerusalem from the 1967 war, and they were harassing, attacking Palestinians. And Standing Together movement had a physical, they were literally there physically on the ground with physical protection presence.
Yeah.
It's
a thing.
In their purple pads, standing as a human shield, essentially. There are Jewish people who are putting themselves as human shields to protect Palestinians.
Mm-hmm.
How
And
do we
it's
not
not
know
only
that
in
these
Jerusalem,
exist?
it also exists in the West
In the
Bank
West Bank
that
a
go
lot.
every single week to settler communities that are really close or that intentionally go to Palestinian neighbors in order to torment and terrorize them. So there is specific like groups of either people from abroad, either not even Jewish. Some of them are even like Christian or from different faiths that aren't Palestinian, aren't Israeli, that come to practice protective presence. That I will use. It's basically I will use my privilege to protect the less privileged, and that's exactly what Standing Together did on that day. And we did see even someone got even injured, like got shot. Um, there was one physical attack from a Jewish settler onto a Palestinian shop owner that was like basically avoided, like the escalation was avoided because of the presence of Standing Together. And I think it's really important to talk about everything that they're doing. Standing Together is doing an amazing, amazing job, and not only unifying Jews and Palestinians in protests, not only standing for minority rights and speaking against the war, but also actively being on the ground 24/7, whether it's to make sure that the humanitarian aid trucks do go to where they're supposed to go, with also their protective presence, because a lot of
Because there are other protests that are
yeah.
happening that are pro the war. We're not saying that they're not there. We have the protests pro the war, and we have those groups who are literally mobilized by, they're mobilized by the government. It's crazy. They're mobilized by a minister in the government, by Ben
Like
Gvir,
Ben-Gvir.
who is part of the government, and the government made the decision to bring in the humanitarian aid, and he's from the government, and he's working
It's
against the
insane.
government's decisions, and to block the humanitarian aid with his thugs that are going and attacking trucks. And Standing Together is trying to combat that, and they're always there making sure that the trucks do come in. And it's this whole clash that they have in order to ensure that the humanitarian aid is there. But there is one group that is somewhat not visible in this paradigm of protests, which is the Palestinian Israeli citizens.
إحنا.
We, as a community, are not there. And the question
True.
is why?
Voila, many reasons why. Many reasons why. Some of them are ideological. Some of them are fear. Some of it is historical and what used to happen before to when we protest. And how Palestinian or any sort of Arab or even minority, I would say minority community in Israel, when they protest, is labeled as being a riot and not a protest, and is dispersed immediately. And I talk a lot about that when I talk about my hometown in Sheikh Jarrah. We weren't allowed to protest. When the Jews from Tel Aviv or from West Jerusalem came to support us, they were allowed to protest each and every Friday. Each and every Friday when I would go to work, I would see them protesting. No one would touch them. They would be like waving Palestinian flags, wearing kufiyas, having from the river to the sea. No one would touch them. As soon as it was more of a mixed issue and Arabs were coming there, that's when it was like, no more. Yeah,
because I have a personal friend who like literally had a grenade thrown right in front of her, like a sound grenade, for being there. Like they were not, violently hurting anyone. They're just standing and chanting.
I was shot at.
And she was with. Wow.
I was shot at. I was in my home. I remember this during 2021. I started seeing a lot of fake videos from what was going on my doorstep. So I decided that I want to like start taking videos whenever I can. And I wanted to send it to, it was still the first, like, this was the beginning of when I actually started having Jewish friends. So for me, it was, I want to show them what's actually going on. And it was also a cool conversation. So I was taking pictures from next to the where I used to study for university and to work. There was like a big like balcony window, and I would stand there and I would take videos. And during that time, there was that rule of no demonstrations, no protests, nothing. So every time more than 3 people would be like standing in the area of Sheikh Jarrah, the Magav, the army police, is it?
Yes.
The army police would come. And now I'm used to seeing army police everywhere in East Jerusalem. I'm used to it. So back then it was like kind of cat and mouse. Like they would get to that point, start becoming more than 3 people, and then they like sound grenades and whatever, and people would run away. So my dad, Allah yarda alayh, he kept the door open so people would have, because we have a big yard. And he was afraid because there was a lot of youth, like a lot of women also were there. So they would come and hide inside of our yard. And I was taking pictures and videos, and I saw one soldier like kneel down onto the floor and start like with his gun aiming at people. And it was like, yes, this is a great shot. I was like, this is a great shot. I'm getting everything. And then the next thing I know, from God, my phone jammed for some reason, and I started hitting my phone, and I turned my face, and the next thing I know, I'm like hit with glass. And I'm super confused. And I remember like looking everywhere, and I looked at the ground and I saw something black. For my first reaction is like, it's a bomb. It's going to explode. So I ran outside of the room. And then nothing happened. So I went back, and it was a rubber bullet. Right next, like, and it like penetrated the window and
Wow.
got into the house. And if I stand next to the hole where it was, right where my head was. So I might not be here if I didn't move or have like a no, like only one eye or a brain something. And in that same day in Sheikh Jarrah, a 13-year-old girl was shot in the back, and she broke her back.
The one who was paralyzed?
Yes, the one who was paralyzed. That was within the same few hours as me getting shot at. So I feel
'Cause I remember that
extremely
story.
lucky. So that's fear. That's why when I joined protests, I think 1,000 times before joining.
Yeah. I mean, we had the protests last year where we had, the whole issue of judicial reforms in Israel. And there was the whole question of, why are the Arabs not here? There were multiple answers. Like you said, there's fear that I can't do the same protest that the Israeli Jewish people are doing. I'll get a different treatment from the police if I'm protesting. And actually, it's really funny because once the police became more violent, I remember one religious man was talking to the liberal secular Jews, saying, "Oh, now you know that the police is violent. It's always violence against the ultra orthodox." I'm like, "Wow, we know that we know that too, Habibi." It's as Arab community, we know how the police treats protests when it's against what they think is the interest. And now when you have the police under Ben Gvir, who completely is against the protests and against the people who are protesting, and calling them people who are getting funding and crazy things like that, and that they're radical, even though we're talking about Israeli citizens, including families of hostages or people who lost their family members. So we know about the police brutality. Also, there's a feeling of, I won't be able to do much, that there is no power to what I do.
Yeah.
So what should I do? And
Because
there's
we don't believe it's a democracy.
Exactly. There's that issue of, well, it's not a democracy. It's not going to help us, and it's not going to do anything. So why would I protest?
Yeah.
So there are all these things that are like feelings of people that prevent them from protesting. And I remember from the 2021, which I really think was kind of a turning point into the Palestinian Israelis in terms of how they perceive protesting. Because I remember my friends, right? They were in Haifa in one of the protests for Sheikh Jarrah. And we can talk maybe later on why Sheikh Jarrah happened. Honestly, it might need its own episode at some point. Maybe we'll talk about it. We'll see. If the judicial reforms come back again, maybe we will talk about it much more in depth. But I can tell you that my friends were in Haifa. They told me we were there for barely 20 minutes. Nothing was happening. There was no violence. There were not even violent chants. We were just there chanting about Sheikh Jarrah. out of nowhere, and I saw like a video from one of my friends who literally recorded it. You see a smoke grenade just dropped in the middle of everyone, and people disperse and running away. And running into the night in Haifa. And I remember my friends making the joke. And, you're talking about my friends who were like, a couple of them were people working in high tech, people were doctors, people were lawyers. And they're just running. And they had police running after them. And the joke was, because of the terror, like being so terrified of being chased after, they were running. And the joke was somebody called the police. The irony of like, we need help. Somebody call the police. And you're being chased by the police. And during that time, and, I think already some of our listeners will, raise an eyebrow and say, well, these protests in 2021, I remember they were the violent protests. They were the protests who were, that caused the lynches and burning the synagogue. Yes, these things absolutely happened. And we're obviously 100% against any usage of violence. But what the portrayal of these protests was that the vast majority were violent. And that was not the case. Because I know an Israeli study that literally mapped out the entire protests, every single one that happened throughout the country. And they had about 92% of the protests, all the Arab protests in Israel 2021 were peaceful. If you watch the news of 2021, in May 2021, you feel that 92% of them were violent because everything was portraying when massive radical things happen, it was given as if everything is like that, as if all the protests are like that. Oh, you're seeing wheels being burnt here, that's everywhere. No, it wasn't. And even when I, in the community where I was at, in an Arab community, we had youth who burned down tires and broke down the bus station and did a lot of vandalism. Honestly, they did it into our own town. They didn't do it to anyone else. And actually, they had a lot of backlash. Like the community itself rose against it. It's like, you're not helping. And they condemned it. Who talks about that? Who talks about the fact that we are condemning when things are being done like that? No, the portrayal is that we're violent. That's all we do. And then if you're protesting, you're being targeted. So you're not going to protest. You're not going to believe in it. And unfortunately, now there's even more so of the fear because you can be arrested for likes. So you're not going to be arrested for a protest. Like that's how people are starting to think about it. And sadly, we're not seeing enough of our people standing in these protests, but hopefully, like the one protest that was in Shvamer, for instance, in one of the Arab towns, standing together, and the Women Wage Peace came to the Arab town to promote protesting together. And I think maybe that is the way forward, is mutual protest in order for us to be together. Also, we're not alone as an Arab community.
But we did protest in the beginning of the war, remember? With the white shirts and the tawabit and all the...
And we had those as well. Absolutely. So there were those things, but not enough. Not in a
no,
bigger,
not
in a big not in the magnitude that it deserves in order for us to bring in the whole Arab community out there. People are afraid. People are against the war in the Arab community, but they're not protesting about it. So there is a miss here. And the country is losing its Arab citizens, as we talked about earlier in this episode.
We can't have an episode about protests without talking about protests. Like, it's not just the Palestinian protests within Israel, but also Palestinian protests in general here. Palestinian protests against the PA, Palestinian protests against Hamas. We've talked about it before, and we've talked about how they exist. And we had an entire episode, I think, dedicated, or part of an episode dedicated towards explaining the protests in Gaza against Hamas. And we're seeing a lot of videos surfacing on social media as well about the protests in Gaza against Hamas by Palestinians.
Yeah, sometimes it's one individual who is just like talking in front of the whole crowd and talking about how Hamas is ruining their lives and what it's doing to their population and how they must do a deal now because they're suffering.
And also in the West Bank, there was a little, not a lot, very minimal. We need way more. And it was in Ramallah, I think. It was in Ramallah, but again, very small, very minimal. We need more. And it was also then attacked very violently by the PA, and like shut down completely. I think it's also not we don't know how to protest. I think that's also a thing. I know it sounds stupid, but it's not within our norms to protest.
No, democracy is a value.
Yeah.
You need to educate about
Yeah.
it and how to do it. I mean, no one learned it in a day, and I think you're absolutely right about this point.
Like even like we'll protest, but we won't continue. Like we'll do it once because we don't know. Like we don't know. Like you said, it is a value that you have. You need to understand how to use it too, and how it will be beneficial. Because to other people, what I'm going to sit in the sun and shout, what's that going to bring? No, you do it again and again and again and again.
The only thing I would add is that people need to be aware that these people. It's not that they don't exist; they're just being silenced.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're being silenced doesn't mean that they're not there or that Palestinians in Gaza don't want to live in dignity and peace. It's just when people do say that thing, it's not only silence, it's also not promoted enough. Not just internally silence. What I mean is they can be silenced by their own community, but also people who are, pro-Palestinian do not share videos of Palestinians from Gaza who are talking about Hamas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
They'll share it when they'll share videos of Palestinian suffering from the Israelis or talking about the suffering because of the Israelis. But if they're going to talk about the suffering because of Hamas, they're not going to share that.
Mm-hmm. Because there's a fear of justifying the war and justifying the bombings. Because yes, they do blame Hamas, but they don't want to be fucking bombed because they don't want the war. They blame Hamas for a lot of things, but they don't feel like it's the sole thing that ruined their entire lives. Israel played a big role in that as well. And I think a lot of Palestinians think that if they share condemning
or even
Hamas,
pro-Palestinian,
or
like
pro-Palestinian,
someone who's not from here.
Yeah.
Why are you not sharing a video of someone who's talking against Hamas? What's the
Because they know that video.
It's a Gazan who's actually.
Because they know that those kinds of videos are used as tokenizing Palestinians. Because who shares those videos of Palestinian condemning
That's
Hamas?
the biggest problem.
Israelis and pro-Israelis.
That's the biggest problem. But why we should give that? If Israelis are sharing it, doesn't mean that it's wrong.
I understand,
That's
but
like
why
the
do they
biggest
share
issue.
it? It's like feeding their agenda of,
Yes.
look, we're helping them get rid of Hamas. Like, I understand that. It's also like why people share our previous guest, Mao Zinon. Why do Palestinians share him, or why do Palestinians share any Jewish person who's anti-Israel in any way, shape, or form? Because it feeds into their agenda. We're also like messed up. A lot of people are messed up in why they share what they share. Sharing a hostage testimony that doesn't want war, or that says anything that's lightly okay or positive about how they were treated. It's messed up. It's all about feeding that agenda.
Like, oh look, Hamas were super nice to them because they gave them water.
Or they're waving. Look, now you care about the hostages. Now they exist. Now it's not a myth. Now it's not propaganda.
Yeah.
So it's messed up. It's like the only time when we actually recognize the other person is when it feeds our own agenda and justifies what we want to do to the other.
Exactly. And I think that's a beautiful way to wrap up this conversation of today.
By saying, don't do that. Don't do that.
And by saying that these people exist, and we hope that positive protests will come out, because we've seen in the world how non-violent movements have succeeded.
Yeah.
And they've done it in much worse cases. If the Indian people, when there was no social media, no mass sharing, they actually relied on nonviolence resistance and a form called Satyagraha by Gandhi. The whole concept was you protest nonviolently, and if the oppressor, the British Empire, treats the nonviolent protest violently, we're going to share it to the world. And think about it. We're talking about the 1940s, where by the time you protest and there's a violence against you, it takes weeks until it gets to the world by newspapers and all of that. So it took even longer to put pressure on the British government. But at the end, because they were, like you said, there was a value of the protesting and continuing. There was leadership that was willing to do that and put it as the core of, and put it as a value. to make the people understand what's the actual outcome of nonviolent resistance and how it will help them. They stuck with it, and they took down one of the biggest empires in history with nonviolent protests. So we can do it too. And to that note, as always, we remind our listeners
in your protests, always advocate for
a better life for all of us, because at the end of the day, we all deserve better.